the difference between goal and aim. You don't reach the goal, but you nevertheless attain the aim. This is the paradox of the drive. So you don't reach the direct satisfaction, but you insist that something insists in this circling around through the very inhibition on the way to the goal. You nevertheless get satisfaction. This is the trouble with the drive. So the renunciation, the inhibition, something is produced which keeps the drive going. Something that drives the drive, and which is the true object. And now I come to the end of this 6 points of the basic traits of culture in following Freud's script, and what is the aim? What is the result? The result would be, and the result towards which I'm trying to steer this, is that the 6 fundamental traits of culture can be read as the 6 fundamental traits of the drive. So what Freud lists as the 6 fundamental traits of culture actually are also 6 fundamental traits of the drive. So first, mastering of nature as a tool can be seen as parallel to the fact that the tool as the prosthesis prolongs the body and is placed in this gray zone, reaching beyond the body, not being simply external. The drive extends over the body, the non-bodily organ. Second, the question of the ornament, the paraelement, the non-functional supplement, the addition, shows the object of the drive from this side of useless appendage, the object of pure expenditure. Third, cleanliness, as the yardstick of culture, points to the question of the inner drive, which doesn't start from bodily needs, but takes the other as its object. Fourth, order points towards compassion to repetition. Fifth, this spiritual elevation, high evaluation of ideas, points towards sublimation, the inherent substitutivity of the drive. And sixth, the social nature of culture points to this renunciation and inhibition as providing satisfaction nevertheless on the way to the goal. It provides the satisfaction that it's aimed as a byproduct. So what would be the result? You know, Lacan insisted on this, the unconscious structured like a language. Could one say the drives are structured like culture? Could one coin this Lacanian adage that actually drives have the structure of culture? So this is the paradox. Do they get the satisfaction from something which was supposed to oppress them? This would follow from Freud's description. And now if we go to this, if we try to push this paradox to the end. The culture is supposed to restrict sexuality. And indeed Freud describes this progress of culture as the progress of growing restriction, of constraint, of channeling of sexual affairs. But is it so that sexuality is repressed by some agency which would be external? Can we draw this picture? We have sexual drives on one hand, and then there is external social force which oppresses sexuality. Our picture is kind of more complicated. Actually, the drives form a strange alliance, a kind of compromise with what was supposed to oppress them. And maybe there's a wrong perspective in this, and I quote two Freud's quotes, which are actually baffling, which is surprising. This is not a quote one usually. This is not a Freud one usually quotes. The first one is from this civilization and discontents. Sometimes one seems to perceive that it is not only the pressure of civilization, but something in the essence of sexual function itself which denies us full satisfaction and urges us along other paths. This may be wrong. It's hard to decide. You can see what he said. It's very paradoxical. Something in the nature of sexuality doesn't want the full satisfaction. It's not that civilization oppresses us, and we would be ever so happy. Could we live in debauchery or something? And the other quote is from another text from 1912. It says, however odd it may sound, in my opinion, we have to consider the possibility that there is something in the very nature of sexual drive which is not inclined to the realization of full satisfaction. So, and there in this paper, Freud gives this humorous example of the relation between the drunkard and his body. It says, the drunkard doesn't need to go away to some faraway country where the wine is more expensive and or alcohol is prohibited. He's perfectly happy. And this is the happy match, He has his body, the happy harmony. There's no gender trouble in this relation to the body. But the sexuality, it seems to be precisely this, that there's something in sexuality which resists stray satisfaction. So it's the inner paradox of the drive itself, which maybe a civilization and its restrictions are actually an extrapolation, externalization of an inner impulse of the drives. So you don't have a picture of, civilization oppressing the drives, but there is an impulse in the drives themselves, which is then externalized as social oppression. So consider you have this intimate linkage between the drives and the cultural sort of restriction. But if there is something contradictory, that if there is an antagonism, an impulse in the drives, how to conceive this conflict? It's the conflict between what and what in the drive. What is the contradictory nature, this impulse, inner impulse of the drive itself? Well, Freud famously proposed that there is an all-pervasive conflict between two kinds of drives, between eros and thanatos, and that this is what subtends all the cultural formations. You consider displacement now. This also happens later in this text, civilization discontents. You consider displacement. The problem is not that we have drives on one hand and culture which is supposed to restrain them on the other hand, but actually Freud displaces the question into the antagonism between two types of drives. We have two kinds of drives which are in eternal antagonism. And there is on the one hand eros, which is the force of unification, union, integration. And he speaks also part of the argument about the way that the libido is deflected from its immediate sexual aims so that it can form, is deflected to the sort of ersatz, to the substitute, it can form the types of friendship, of neighborly love, of groups, of social formations, of nation, of state, humanity. So there is this force of cohesion in the eros, which subtends this unifying perspective on the question of culture, the unifying glue. And then, as opposed to this, we have the death drive, the thanatos, which is the force of disintegration, negativity, aggression, dissolution, destruction, which strives in the opposite direction, prevents and unity. So, if one takes this as a sort of conceptual background on which to consider this, both from Freud, the culture is appear as the struggle between eros and death, between the drive of life and the drive of destruction. And it works itself out as it works itself out in the human species. So the eros would be the building force of culture, death drive would be the opponent and undermining, the undoing of these types of cohesion. And on the last page, quote from the last page, the very famous last page, says, "Thus I have not the courage to rise up before my fellow men as a prophet, and I bow to their reproach, that I can offer them no consolation." So, the faithful issue is that how to master and subdue the drive of aggression and self-destruction, since technology has advanced to the point that humanity can annihilate itself, exterminating one another to the last. And somehow he says, "I'm not a prophet. I don't know what to do." And the last sentences, Now it is to be expected that the other of the two heavenly powers, the eternal Eros, will make an effort to assert himself in the struggle with his equally immortal adversary. But who can foresee with what success and with what result? So this is the note on which this text ends. And we have an editor's note telling us the final sentence was added in 1931 in the second edition, when the menace of Hitler was already beginning to be apparent. See, the text was written in 29, but he added this in 31, where there was a very immediate bloody question of the survival of civilization, of this struggle between, eternal struggle between Eros and Thanatos. So, what is Freud's answer here? I think it's deeply unsatisfactory as an answer. He says, there's an eternal struggle. What best we can do is to be, let's hope for the good side to win. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Eros will maybe take the upper hand over Thanatos. But we also know that this is an endless strife and this can never come to conclusion. But the best we can do is let's bet on the better opponent. Hopefully we can get lucky or something.
I'm kidding.
So one can see that this is very strange. This is really a very unsatisfactory outcome of this. And I would now say quite quickly that if we have this eternal quasi-cosmic struggle of two heavenly powers, this is a simplification. This is precisely what Freud shouldn't have done in this case. Because Freud himself, on many places he speaks about the question of ambivalence and this tendency of psychic to divide, for instance, the fatherly figure, which is always a figure of tension and ambivalence, to divide the fatherly figure into the good father and the bad father. You have two figures. Instead of addressing the contradictory nature of the fatherly figure, you construct two figures. One is good, one is bad. You divide, good and bad part. And instead of addressing the contradiction, espousing the contradiction. So this story of this eternal struggle is suspiciously kind of similar to this, and suspiciously similar to the kind of Manichaean accounts of history. From the dawn of humanity, you have these accounts of eternal struggle between life and darkness. There are light and darkness. Two principles eternally struggle with each other. It's seriously pre-modern mythical universe. You posit two cosmological principles, which are always in struggle, never in quite in balance. Who knows who will get the upper hand? There's eternal struggle. And actually, later, his last text, Freud actually has a very praising reference to Empedocles, who was a great Greek naturalist of the 5th century before Christ, and he was the author of this mythical account, the strife between Philia and Naples. Philia as the forces of love, Naples as the forces of dispute and disintegration. And Freud says, Empedocles comes so close to the psychoanalytic theory of the drives that one could maintain that they are identical if it wasn't for the difference that the Greek's theory is a cosmic fantasy, while our theory pretends to have biological validity. This is really strange. Empedocles was right, but this was a fantasy. But we don't have a fantasy. This is a science. But what kind of science is this? Because nevertheless, whenever we are speaking about the drives, we are actually in a hazy realm of mythology. And if you have read Beyond the Pleasure Principle, you know that when Freud gets into real trouble with his argument, he comes up with Plato. He comes up with Plato's account of the missing heart, the Aristophanes species. No? This is still the best explanation we have. which is completely, a mythical account. So, and in the new introductory lectures, he says, I quote, "The theory of drives is, so to say, our mythology. Drives are mythical entities, magnificent in their indefiniteness. In our work, we cannot disregard, yet we are never sure that we are seeing them clearly." So, Freud somehow admits that there are mythical creatures that are not scientifically proven or provable. So we have to have recourse to these narratives, mythical narratives, to speak about what we do. And now if we try to, I would say this is the simplified or bad part of Freud. This is the way one should go. But if we try to now go in a different direction, again starting from Freud, you can see that, let's ask a simple question. How many drives are there? What drives are we speaking of? If we say this plural, the drives, how many? And you can see in the three essays, in 1905, he introduced the notion of drive. He presented it in a completely different light. He presented the drives as being fragmented, partial, polymorphous nature of the libido, which is driven by these deviations, autoeroticism, polymorphic aversion, anarchy, fetishism, and partial objects. So what is the picture of the drive there? It's precisely this fragmented, partial, multiple, heterogeneous, polymorphous picture. And the reader of the three essays would be completely confounded to find out that this nature of libido in this book would then become the cultural hero of unification, like a quarter century later. You have a completely different picture when Freud first introduced the drive. He introduced precisely this fragmentation, partialization, partial objects, polymorphous nature. How come that a quarter century later he somehow said,